Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. I wouldn't call it crisp, but it is cool. Like I'm wearing jeans and a long sleeve shirt, and I feel like I'm not going to be uncomfortable during the walk. So it's really nice. It's about 8 in the morning. It's June 12th today, and I'm happy to be talking to you. Welcome to the podcast. So it's been a little while since I've talked about new games I've been playing, in part because it's slowed down a little bit, in part because I'm trying to decide how many new games I want to talk about that I've only played digitally. You know, I hesitate a little bit to talk about those, but those are for a later day. Today, we're going to do a board game espresso triple shot. Glug, glug, glug. So, for those of you new to the podcast, a board game espresso triple shot is where I talk about 3 new games that I've played recently for the first time and give my first impressions of them. The idea is it's not a review segment necessarily, but a quick conversation. Just as a reminder, I am myself a board game designer and I'm part owner of a board game company, so I do have a fiscal reason to compete with these games, if on whatever level you want to attribute that as part of potential bias on my part. I just want to make sure that it's clear where I am. But I'm intending anyway to review these as a passionate consumer of board games more than as a competitor to them. So the first game I talk about is a classic game called Dutch Blitz. Dutch Blitz is a card game that apparently emerged out of the either the Mennonite or Amish communities, then was published as a full-on commercial game and is widely available. You can buy it in either the green pack or the blue pack, and the idea is that if you get both, then you can play twice as many people in one game, I believe is the idea there. The game design is credited to Werner Ernst and George Mueller, but I'm not sure that they actually designed it versus it being a folk game that they've copied down. It was published in 1960. So the way you play the game is a speed game in which you have a bunch of cards that have different numbers on them, and then people are playing cards on the table with other numbers on them. And the idea is you want to get rid of all your cards by contributing your cards to stacks of cards of numbers. So for example, and you go through the cards in roughly solitaire form, Klondike solitaire form, where you draw 3 and look at them and you can play them, otherwise you discard and go on. In Klondike solitaire, at least as I've always played it, you have to play the cards in order. You can't just grab the middle card and play it, or maybe you can. It's been a long time since I played that. In this game, you can play any of the cards that you draw, and then if once you've played or not played those cards, you put them in your discard pile and pick up 3 new ones and go again. But the game is about speed, and also because you're all contributing to the same pile. So if I put a 1 down, more than one person might have a 2 in their hand, and they both are trying to add to that 2 pile. And we continue on from there, and you go until somebody runs out of cards, and then you get points for every card that you got onto the table, and I think you lose points for every card still in your deck. When I started playing this, I'm like, oh, this is familiar. That's because the game Rainbow Rabbits is Dutch Blitz, but with colors. I don't know whether the designer of Rainbow Rabbits has played Dutch Blitz, and it's slightly different. And, you know, Dutch Blitz is old enough that I think using colors is a novel modification and worth exploring. Also put a little bit of amusing art on there that's kind of missing from the Dutch Blitz one. But, yeah, mostly it's a speed game, really fast. I would say slightly more accessible than Rainbow Rabbits, which is the one I'm talking about as a newer iteration on it, because Rainbow Rabbits has colors and you have to remember the color order versus Dutch Blitz using numbers. And I think for most people, number order is instinctive, color order is mostly instinctive, or for some people, not at all. I think I mentioned when I reviewed Rainbow Rabbits that my mother-in-law did not know the color order. That apparently whenever Roy G. Biv became universal, it did not make its way into my mother-in-law's school when she was a child. So she did not know that color order. So anyway, highly recommend it if you get a chance to play it or pick it up somewhere. Dutch Blitz, certainly a winner in my book. Definitely a game I will pick up at some point if I find it for a reasonable amount. I'm hoping it'll be the sort of thing I'll run into at a Goodwill. So that's Dutch Blitz. All right, the next game I'm going to talk about is called Earth. Now this is one that I was going to not probably review anytime soon because it is part of my online play. I played it a bunch of times on Board Game Arena. However, it is also something I've now played on the table. When I was at my Toggle Gaming Club a couple weeks ago, somebody brought a copy of Earth and set it up, and I'm like, yeah, I have played this in person, or I've played this online, and I would like to play it in person. The designer is Maxime Tardif, and it's published by Inside Up Games. So I will say that the things I thought were true about Earth from having played it online are in fact true about it, which is that A, I thought it would be easier to play in person than online, at least to kind of understand it. B, I thought it would be more fun in person than online. Those are both true, and it turns out to be 100% true. I enjoyed it more in person than I have enjoyed it online, and it is, in fact, easier to understand in person than it was online. I would say the tactility of the grid and the process of playing cards is significantly easier online. The necessity or ability to remember the different scoring conditions I find easier in person. Now, if I go back and play it online, I may find that it's in fact not that hard, and that the problem I was experiencing was that I didn't really understand it, and now that I understand it, I should do better. But it does take a slightly different amount of attention. That said, it's still just okay for me. I didn't think it was amazing. Okay, so a couple things about it that just didn't work as well. So it's often compared, I've seen it compared to Terraforming Mars. I've seen it compared to Ark Nova. Those seem to be the two main places compared. In part Ark Nova because it's also a nature game with a ton of cards. Terraforming Mars because it's also a game where you're building a sort of tableau with a ton of cards. I'm acting like you all know this game. You might not know the game. So Earth is a tableau building card selection game in which you are developing a island in, I don't know, proto-Earth before humans. There are some animals around, but the animals represent scoring conditions. Mostly what you're doing is growing plant life. Your goal is to accumulate a number of different resources, mostly earth or loam or soil or whatever it's called, and then to spend that to grow plants of different types in order to engage with bonus scoring conditions, as well as individual scoring conditions that appear on your cards. The novel mechanisms in the game, the big one is that over the course of the game, you're building out a tableau of 16 cards in a 4x4 grid. And when someone finishes their grid, that ends the game. In that tableau, you resolve it from left to right, top row to bottom row. And all of the cards, and the game uses a follow mechanism. So there are 4 base actions that, like Race to the Galaxy or Puerto Rico, I think. I haven't played Puerto Rico, but like Race for the Galaxy, if you take the main action, then the other people get to copy it with a lesser payout. But then every time someone takes an action of a particular color, all of your cards in your tableau of that color activate. And then on top of that, when those cards activate, the bonus that's built into those cards, you have to do them in order. That's the tricky part. So if it's a grid of 16 cards, you have to go left to right, top row to bottom row. So as you're putting cards, and you can't move your cards once you put them in the grid. So you're constantly having to think about where in the order you want a particular card to go, because a lot of cards will add things or subtract things. So you can have a sort of machine that gives you 3 soil and then spends 3 soil to do a thing, and has you draw a card and then discard a card, and there's a whole bunch of stuff like that. And of course, all of these things are optional, so you're choosing the whole time whether to run them or not. There are lots of different ways to score, too many to go over here, except to say, I will say that there are a number of different plant growth cards where you get to build these little plant trees on your board, which are these little towers with discs and then a little tree top thing on the top. It looks like a mushroom top, but it just means the top of the tree. Because I think trees do it as well as mushrooms and other things. You're not just growing mushrooms with that kind of card. Like I said, I enjoyed this game. I would play it again if somebody asked me to. I'm probably not going to ask people to bring it out, and I'm definitely not going to buy it. I find the theme Earth far, far less compelling than the more interesting themes of like Ark Nova, where you're doing animals, or even Terraforming Mars, which has some narrative arc to it. This game has no characters at all, so it is sort of undirected, and it's unclear what or who we're supposed to be. And I find that kind of game difficult to imagine. Is what is my agency here? What am I supposed to be? Who am I supposed to be? That's kind of a problem I had with Evolution as well, if you remember that game. And I also find the graphic design in this game pedestrian. That's a very snooty word. Just not compelling. So it was a miss for me. I know a lot of people like it, and it's certainly climbing the ranks. It's an interesting game, but I think it's not as interesting as other games in that market, though, thus far. Your Terraforming Marses or your Ark Novas are sort of the two closest, and I think both of those games are better than this one. So that's Earth. The third game I played is a Vital Lacerda game that my buddy Paul brought over. This is a game that I've wanted to play for a long time, and in fact, I had a funny story about it. A friend of mine had it and wanted to play it, and he brought it to Toggle Gaming, my local game club, and we had agreed we would play it. So he read the rules and watched the video, and I read the rules and watched the video, and we got all ready to play. We got to game night, and he's setting it up, and I said, buddy, I gotta admit, I do not know how to play this game. It's too hard. I couldn't understand it. So if you can teach me, I'll happily learn, but I couldn't get it on my own. And he said, you know what? I had the same experience. So we played something else. And that was several years ago, and I hadn't played it since until my friend brought it over last night. This is Lisboa from Vital Lacerda. Lisboa is a game about the reconstruction of Lisbon after a big earthquake destroyed it. You play, I don't know, members of noble houses, as is often the case in any game about a European city. And you're trying to gain the favor of various nobles as you are building the city. Now, like many Vital Lacerda games, including ones I've covered on the podcast before, like On Mars or Weather Machine, and this game has a series of interlocking systems and different ways that you interact with those systems. And successful play of the game involves finding efficiencies and shortcuts, managing your rule breakers that allow you to do slightly better at things than your compatriots, managing the timing of things so that you get the best result of an action before someone else does, and so on. It's a very complicated game, and probably one that if I don't play it again within a couple weeks, I'm going to lose most of the rules for it and I'll have to relearn it. That said, I really enjoyed Lisboa. I'll try to give you, okay, so a couple highlights from the game, main things. The big thing is you have cards, and they're multi-use cards. You can use them to either do one of two kinds of actions that allow you to interact with. Okay, so you can play them in one or two ways that give you bonuses, either a rule breaker bonus or some sort of resource usually, and then you get to do 2 of 6 actions, but you can only do those actions if you can spend the resource you need to do those actions. Alternately, you can play the board to the Visit the Nobles section, which allows you a different kind of access to those actions, as well as doing these sort of super actions, which being able to do those allows you to build buildings and send merchant ships out to sea, and those are the things that earn you a lot of points. Like I said, it's a very complicated game, and it wouldn't be worthwhile trying to go into it much more in depth than I have right here, except to say that I found it more understandable early in the cycle than many Lacerda games I've played. Now, this might just be I'm inured to his mania, and so when I'm playing his games, I understand them more easily than I used to. Or it might be that I've grown as a gamer, and so I can understand these complex systems more easily. Or, and this is where I land on the opinion scale, that this game is slightly more comprehensible and the systems make a little bit more sense than some of the other games. Regardless of which one is the answer, I did really enjoy Lisboa, and it definitely worked its way toward the top of my heap. I would say, thinking of the Lacerda games that I've played, which include The Gallerist, The Getaway, it's not The Getaway, Getaway Plan, Weather Machine, Lisboa, and On Mars, I would say it's up in the top echelon near On Mars, and I think Weather Machine. My instinct is those other two games are lower, but with the exception of The Gallerist, I have really enjoyed all the Lacerda games I've played enough that I would probably play them again. And frankly, even if someone said, hey, you want to play The Gallerist again, I'm setting it up, I would probably play. Because even though that one wasn't my favorite, there was still interesting stuff going on, and it is worth playing again, I think. The graphic design is lovely, although it's just, do you like muted blues and greens, is the question. If so, you're probably set for a good time with Lisboa. That's Lisboa from Vital Lacerda, graphic design by Ian O'Toole, published by Eagle Gryphon Games. And then finally, for my dusted off game this month, I'm talking about Hellboy, the board game. Now, this is a game I haven't played in a long time. I gave it a pretty positive review when I first got it. I played 3 rounds of Hellboy early on, and then I kind of put it away. I started getting out again this year when I started doing painting, because I realized I wanted to play it again, and part of it is I haven't painted it. And I thought it would be fun to paint. There's a lot of minis, so I can kind of practice on a lot of different things, and they're all kind of low stakes, because there are 6 rampaging frogmen and 6 venomous frogmen, and there's a lot of room to make mistakes and not have anyone notice or care. And so I was looking for a game to play somewhat on the regular with my son this summer, and he said that he would be willing to give Hellboy a try, and we played a round of it, and he really enjoyed it. So we've now played it several times, and I think it's going to be part of the regular visit this summer. So I am going to try to get more of it painted, because it is way more fun when the minis are painted. If you're not familiar with it, Hellboy is based on the Mike Mignola comic of the same name. It is about a supernatural being who was accidentally summoned to Earth by Nazis in the 40s. Or actually, he was summoned on purpose by Nazis in the 40s, but then American paranormal investigation soldiers killed all the Nazis and kidnapped the demon baby and raised it good. It's a classic nature versus nurture story in which nurture wins out, and the red-faced demon with a tail and goat feet and a giant stone hand turns out to be a good guy for fighting monsters on behalf of humanity. It's a interesting, amusing story, mostly funny with a little bit of drama in there. I really like it. So when they announced the game a while back, I kind of went all in. I didn't get every single thing because they had all this resin stuff that was really expensive for stuff you would only use occasionally. Instead, I went in for all of the gameplay stuff, which is scenarios you'd only use occasionally, which speaks to the fact that I got the big Kickstarter edition of the game 3-4 years ago now, 3.5 years ago, and I am only just now getting past the stuff I played originally that 3 years ago. And I still have 2 more boxes of stuff, the big box of Doom and the box of Evil, that I haven't even opened. So plenty of Kickstarter goodness, plenty of Hellboy to go around for my son and I to play in the next few years, which is great because it's a fun game. It is a Ameritrashy dungeon crawl game. It involves a lot of dice rolling. It's got a really neat testing system. So you have fight, you have defense, you have investigate, and shooting. And whenever you're doing those things, you roll dice of a certain color. So there are 3 different colors available, or there are 4 different colors available of dice. There's yellow, orange, and red, getting successively stronger. There's also black dice, but you never get to roll those automatically. You have to upgrade to those. And then you roll the dice, and then you adjust your skill level or your chances in a particular battle with upgrades and downgrades. So let's say you get 2 upgrades because of weapons you have, and then there's 1 downgrade because of environmental conditions. Then you get a total of 1 upgrade, so you can pick one of your dice and upgrade it once. In the end, you can do up to 3 upgrades or 3 downgrades as a way to alter your odds of doing well in the battle. It's a really fun system, very thematic, full of dice chalking, full of random luck that could totally swing the game one way or another, but ultimately very fun. We've been having a good time with it. I don't know if I could say I recommend it. I think it's really fun, but really you have to know yourself. If this sounds like the kind of game that you think you'd have a good time with, I think you got to check out some gameplay videos. I haven't seen a ton of people saying how much they like the game though, so I bet that you can find, at least on some level, some of the stuff available on the secondhand market as people are clearing their shelves and realizing, oh, I guess I don't like that game, or I'm not going to play it. Maybe anyway. So that's Hellboy, the board game. What games have you been playing recently? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your experiences with us. I'd love to hear what games have made their way onto your shelf, what you're thinking of new games, and how your June is going. It's already June 12th. Oh my goodness. We are flying through the month with no end in sight. Or actually, an end in 26 days, 28 days. So, yeah, I guess an end is very much in sight. So in that regard, head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know. You can also reach out directly, Brendan at rattleboxgames.com, or send me a message over on Board Game Geek. Wombat929 is my username there. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.